What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Fitness for Life podcast. I am your host, Jackson Lohr, and today I'm going to have hopefully a short but sweet one for you. Today we're going to walk through a particular client scenario, and really what I'd like for this to be is for you guys to understand how, as a coach, and as I'm thinking about how to put together a program for somebody, what all is taken into account? How do we structure certain things? When do we choose not to pursue something with someone versus when is it then appropriate? And how do we kind of layer in different things? So the particular client that I'm using is somebody who's a little bit more started out with me. When they started out with me 3 years ago, they were a little bit more tentative and also, very high fall risk, someone who did not have a lot going for them in terms of they had a lot of pain, they had a lot of mobility restrictions, was concerned about falls, couldn't really get up and down off the ground. So this is a very reality has set in, for this person before they've even come to me. What I'm going to walk you through is how do we take somebody in that scenario and move them towards a place of being able to do actually what they want to do. So, the first step for this person is mobility. And you may have heard me say it before, but you can't just go purely after strength without addressing mobility first, because then you get somebody who's even tighter, potentially causing even more pain. And especially if we're not addressing all planes of motion, all three planes of motion, then you're going to get a really problematic person on your hands, or problematic scenario, on your hands. And that's not something we want. It's not a situation we want to be in or put somebody in. We want to be cautious of that. So when I'm working with somebody in pain, when I'm working with somebody who has a lot of mobility restrictions, the first thing I'm doing is addressing, where do we start? Do we want to start with strength? Do we want to start with conditioning? Do we want to start with mobility? Mobility is always that first thing that I'm like, all right, if we can work on nothing else, we can work on this. What does that look like? What that looks like for this particular person, we need to make sure that hip mobility was good. So we, improved. We worked on a couple of exercises that addressed hip mobility, a couple of exercises that focused on spinal mobility. And when I talk about spinal mobility and hip mobility, like I mentioned earlier, I'm talking about all planes of motion. So we have the plane, that is sort of our frontal, and even our sagittal plane. But then we also have the transverse plane. So if I looked at you from the top down, if I was in a helicopter or a hot air balloon, and I looked at you from the top down, where would I see motion? So that's the twisting and the turning, the rotational movements there. If I'm looking at you from the side, usually that's the toe touches or the squats or the things that happen from that I can see and visibly see from the side. And then also, from the front, what all is happening here? Am I raising my arms up over my head? That sort of thing. You have movement that happens in those different planes. In order to have a holistic mobility approach, we want to address movement in all planes of motion at as many joints as possible to get the best, get the most out of that work and to really optimize somebody's movement. So for this person, stage one was basically a year of slow but steady improvement on mobility. And what that looks like is, it's a lot of, I don't want to do too much in these exercises. So for this person, it was 5 days a week. We were doing exercises regularly, but each joint or area was really only getting one, maybe two exercises targeting it each week, or each day, excuse me. And that the purpose behind that was we were not throwing tons of, aggressive volume at something that was already in pain, something that was already, tight. And so we wanted to be able to spread things out a little bit. And that's my general approach to rehab too, is just having more of a broad approach that allows you to recover better in between. And that recovery is where we see adaptation take place in the body. So, we did that extensively over, a year, where then, what we also did was we focused on the principles of pain and focused on, changing our breathing techniques, learning what positions were acceptable and what positions were not going to be painful, and teaching, using some of the neurology and neurological techniques to, or excuse me, psychological techniques, to remind the brain that, hey, using my breath, I can tell you that this is not a painful or not a dangerous position to be in. And so we took advantage of those times. We were able to, just educate about what things are, harmful, and what things aren't. And so mobility was that initial focus. Moving on, then, once we were able to gain some mobility, now to reinforce that mobility, we want to build strength through the range of motion that we have. And so that was that next piece where, now we're adding weights on top, and we're adding resistance bands, and we're adding, we're challenging the body. We're going further in our mobility work so that, now there's additional tension to the body that's coming. And so, yeah, that mobility is great, but if we don't reinforce it with strength in the muscles, we actually can, if we're not careful, increase risk there, of an injury while someone's lifting. So what we want to do is, as soon as we can, when we build range of motion, it's not that we didn't start right away. We started as soon as we unlocked, a certain amount of range of motion. Then we're stacking a little bit of strength on top of it, and so really transitioning to more strength focused work. Meanwhile, we haven't lost the approach to mobility, of improving mobility and kind of pushing the bounds there. So what I want you to have in mind here is mobility work is not lost when we add strength on top. It's just that less of the range of motion that we're using is focused on just the mobility. Now it's okay. We might be just looking for that last 2 or 3, 2 to 5 degrees of range of motion. That's where we're going to do our mobility work, or we're going to do it more in accessory work, not kind of separately focused from the strength days or the strength work. So strength training, obviously that's never going to leave somebody's program once it's in it. The mobility work that we started, that was like the focused exercises. Then what we did is took 2 or 3 of those that we felt like were the most important to this particular person, and I took those and I said, hey, these are going to be your new warm-up exercises. We're keeping them in the program. However, instead of you doing very light, easy exercises as part of your exercise program, now they are your warm-ups. So took out some of the easier warm-ups, replaced them with some of the easier exercises. Now those mobility exercises are the new warm-ups for the strength training program. So strength, that's where you really amped things up, and really took this person from, not being confident in her own strength to, being able to lift, 100 plus pounds with, pretty fair deal of confidence, on a regular basis. And so doing that safely, doing that, in an approach that allows that person to, express strength regularly and do it on her own time, that is something that builds a lot of confidence, obviously. But for somebody who's lived with a lifelong disability, provides a tool to express some athleticism for the first time. But also, the reason we pursue that is strong bones, strong muscles that will not only carry her throughout the rest of her life, but also set her up to potentially even, continue reducing disability later in life, as entering retirement. My goal for this person is getting to a place where, no one would know that she's lived with a physical disability her whole life. The idea behind building that raw strength allows us to pursue something like that. And you do have to be careful. You want to be mindful of flare-ups, because they'll happen. Anytime you're pursuing a little bit more aggressive strength, flare-ups happen. Pain is a normal part of training, and we want to listen to our bodies and be mindful of days that, we probably shouldn't push it. So that's something to keep in mind. for this person, when we first started working together, cardiovascular training is not something that was really possible. Uh, but after a couple of years of working and, a shift from doing everything at home to being able to get into a gym environment that was ideal for exercising, we were able to find a cardiovascular training machine that allows her to push herself in that realm. So for her, this next stage is cardiovascular training. Now that we've built mobility, now that we've established some good strength measures, now can we take that and push it from a cardiovascular training standpoint? And obviously, with that in mind, we want to protect her heart. We want to train her heart, and it's not something she's been able to do in the past, just as a result of what she's been dealing with her whole life. We're introducing this for the first time, so we are being very careful in how we do it. For her, what we did was starting really slow, minimal resistance, but doing it for about 10 minutes, once a week. Nothing crazy, on top of daily steps, which for her I think are somewhere in the realm of about 4,000. So daily steps, but also, we were protective of her heart. We want this for heart health. We're also pursuing it for the purpose of improving her ability to recover. So those of you who don't know, you know, heart health and cardiovascular endurance is one of building up that quality is actually one of the things that allows us to recover from training and from exercise, and from just general activity much better. It improves your recovery of pain, stiffness, your muscle recovery. And it's one of those things that allows us to do things repetitively. The more we build that up, the more we build up our ability to repetitively perform tasks that are challenging to ourselves, to our bodies, consistency, and without having to rest these longer periods in between. And so for my purposes, my goals with building up that with helping her build that up is that we are improving her resilience and her ability to recover so that she can train harder every session in the long run without needing to recover quite so long, or without a hard session really taking her out for a few days, if and when that does happen. So that's for you guys to understand. That's where my mindset is in taking somebody like that and really focusing now, shifting the focus to cardiovascular training. Having said that, it doesn't mean we take away any of the strength training or take away any of the mobility. What we've done is just tacked on this, I think right now about 13 minutes. Started out at 10, slowly over the course of 5 months have worked her way up to 13 minutes. So she's added about, a little bit about close to about 30 seconds per month onto that, with a targeted improvement pretty much every other week. And so that's exactly where we want to be, is continuing to push that. Where this is headed is just a couple of goals that we're working on at the moment. Obviously, continued reduction of general pain, continued improvement of movement quality, continued reduction of fall risk. There's a couple of specific movement qualities where we're continuing to work on, where mobility is the focus, and being able to, have endurance with movements that are challenging is one of the focuses there. So continuing to work on those things, but also what we're doing is improving and building in some athleticism there as well, where, we're starting to introduce something like a faster squat, like a speed squat. We're starting to introduce from the get-go, I have introduced medicine ball slams and variations of that, to improve, upper body speed of movement and get, that going, so that, with improved mobility, with improved strength, with improved cardiovascular training, what that opens up is the possibility of, sport, eventually. is if we can get her to a place where she's comfortable participating in sport, whatever that might be, she is able to do that. And that's one of the things we know long term is a really great tool for building community, a really great tool for maintaining our health long term. It's a really great way to connect with other folks and just enjoy the way that our bodies can move. And what that, at that point, what she does with it is fully up to her. But that is what I am trying to set her up for the possibility of, is being able to move athletically without hurting herself and without risking any additional injury other than the average risk that there is. And so hopefully you guys can track with me, what does that look like for somebody? Reason I share this is because I think it's important to understand that not everybody can start from a place of trying to train every category. And I did a podcast or a class a while back talking about my perfect day as a retiree. If I had to have a perfect day of eating and exercising and habits, what would that look like? It's not necessarily in the realm of possibility for everyone right away. And that's why I walk you through, like, this is a longer, with this particular client, this is a longer term approach where we have to very carefully, very slowly build in these qualities that allow us to train other qualities. And so, really we're kind of in that third stage, teetering on being in that fourth stage. And that fourth stage is kind of the final stage where we're able to train, just about every quality that we'd like to. And for that, then you get to a place where, and some people start in this place where you're able to train anything you want to, because those qualities are at least existent enough to allow for it. So what I want to say there is, if you are in a scenario where you're unable to do something, or unable to do something specific that you'd like to, and you want to be able to train something, go ahead, shoot me a comment, shoot me a message. And what I'll do is I will set up a time for us to chat, talk through and strategize about what it is that you actually need to be doing in order to set yourself up for the possibility of that next phase, the next thing that you want to be training. Hope you guys got something out of this and really appreciated it. This is, like I said, it's a real life person, real life scenario. And it is so that you understand, there are stages in life potentially, and different realities for people, that not everybody's going to be able to train everything right from the get-go. And so be patient with yourself if you're in that scenario. I hope you'll give yourself and your body and even just your injury history grace to be able to move forward, do the next thing that will allow you to live a stronger, healthier life. We'll see you guys next time.